Welcome to Chapter 13. Now, the process of getting an operating system running on your computer, it's an interesting process. When you first start your computer, it knows nothing about the operating system that might be stored on a storage device somewhere. All it knows is that there's a keyboard connected and a mouse. There's memory. There's a storage device on this computer, and it really checks the basics of the hardware to see if everything's there. And let's do a power on self-test or post. So it sees if all the basic physical things are there and that they're working. And then once that power on self-test or post is complete, there's a bootstrap loader in the BIOS that starts a program which is then going to start your operating system. So this is a multi-step process as we go through it. This bootstrap loader in the BIOS often references a second stage bootloader. In Windows, this is WinLoad. In other operating systems, you may be using Grub Legacy or Grub2 or LILO. This is what's actually going to start the operating system on your computer. With a legacy BIOS, your computer relies on a master boot record or an MBR. This often is the first sector of a very large hard drive, but it's just a small portion of it. It's a very small portion, and it's usually only 512 bytes in length. It stores the important information about where the partitions are on the hard drive and how it's configured. So it's kind of like a map, if you will, of the hard drive, where the important things are and how it's laid out. If you look at a graphical display of the boot process, when you see the MBR record on a certain drive, there's this boot sector in the OS kernel for two different partitions. So there are probably two different operating systems that could be run on this system. So that MBR really helps us know what options are there and how do we get through it. Okay? Now we've got something new which we call a Uefi BIOS. Now on a Uefi, you don't have an MBR or master boot record. Instead, you have an EFI system partition. This is also called ESP. And in this system partition may be configuration files to load up particular operating systems. Okay? Now, we have a choice of either Uefi or Legacy, which is the BIOS, a standard traditional BIOS. And they do work in a similar fashion, but not the same. If a system has been designated as a Uefi system, it requires that EFI or the ESP. If that's not there, this system will not boot, and it doesn't recognize any hard drive as being there. So if we think back, that post just recognizes there's stuff there. Once we get into the MBR or the boot process, we're using either the BIOS or the Uefi. If it's the BIOS, we go to the MBR. That's that small little 512 bytes in length little file that says here's how this is all laid out. If we tell the system we're going to use Uefi instead of BIOS, we better have an ESP to go to. If no ESP exists, then we have no little mapping to explain to this system where to go look for the required information. Okay. So we wouldn't be able to boot if we didn't have that information. So if I have problems with the MBR or a volume boot record, we want to use a command prompt, and we can go into a command prompt and we can use fix MBR or fix boot, scan OS, rebuild BCD. There's so many things that we can use from a command prompt. Now, a command prompt, as we said in the previous chapter, can take quite a while to get used to because it's like learning a different language. But the functionality that's there is phenomenal. Okay? So it is something that's worth the time to get used to and learn how to use a command prompt. In Windows Server, we use a form of command prompt which is called PowerShell. And that uses what we call commandlets. And it's a little different than the standard command line interface. So if you hear PowerShell, you'll know that that's like a flavor of, if you will, a command prompt. Okay. So we'll see you in the next one, Unit 14.